Yeah, and then upwards from that for Korea and Vietnam and conflicts since then.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Boy, oh boy. Now, I was also wondering, Geoff, did you
Mhm.
go to Guadalcanal at all? Have you ever visited?
I have not been there yet. Hoping to get there in the not too far future. It just hasn't worked out with real job and family and all that. But it's definitely very high on my list of places to go.
Yeah. Yeah, not exactly a family vacation spot, I imagine.
I've heard it depends what your family's interested in.
Yes.
Oh.
Right. Yeah. That's one step above, dragging your kids to Civil War sites, right, Ellie?
I'd say so.
Well, my kid had better look out because that's how I grew up.
All right. Well, are we? I can start playing the music and we can start letting people in.
All right.
All right.
Hello, everyone. I'm looking around, seeing some new faces. Marianne Raymer's with us. I'm glad you joined us, Marianne. Lamar Kruckenberg from North Dakota. Good to see you, Lamar. Nice to meet you. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Todd DiPastino. I am the host of this program, which is called the VBC Happy Hour. And VBC stands for Veterans Breakfast Club. We started in 2008 having veterans come together to share stories at breakfast. And then we started doing afternoon events and then evening events. And then for the past year, we've been doing virtual events. And because of that, we've been able to get people from, across the nation and across the world coming and sharing stories of their service. I'm looking at, I see several people who are joining us here, I believe for the first time. I know Lamar Kruckenberg. Lamar, thank you. We just emailed briefly back and forth. He's from North Dakota. We have Eric Gillard from New York City. And we have two guests today, Geoff Raker, who's joining us from New York. And he is the founder of Missing Marines and also the author of quite an interesting and well-written book called Leaving Mac Behind, The Lost Marines of Guadalcanal. And he's going to talk to us about his efforts to find, locate, and investigate the deaths of MIAs, especially on Guadalcanal and Tarawa. And then we also have somebody, and I'm going to embarrass our two guests a lot because I've spent much of the day looking over there, reading about them and looking at the work that they've done. I'll embarrass Justin, I guess. I think Justin LeHew, who's joining us from Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Absolutely, Todd. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm sure he'll demur, but he is a Marine legend. And he served 31 years in the United States Marine Corps. He retired as a master sergeant, and he's been called the Hero of Nasiriyah. And if you just Google his name, you will read a lot of interesting things about Justin. And we're going to try and coax him maybe to share some stories from his really interesting and illustrious and inspiring Marine career. But he's also here representing who he works for now and works with, which is called History Flight, which is an organization that works very closely, I understand, with missing Marines to help locate MIAs around the world. There are 82,000 American MIAs from World War II through the present around the world. 82,000. Geoff just told me 72,000 of those are from World War II. And Justin and Geoff have really dedicated their lives, a big part of their lives, to recovering as many of these MIAs as they possibly can. And it's really a fascinating and inspiring story. I understand Geoff's father, Stephen, is with us, and I just want to say you should be very proud of your son. And I'll tell you why. It's if you go to his site, and I know we're jumping right in. I need to. Why don't I introduce Sean? Hi, Sean. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Ellie, how are you doing, Ellie?
Doing well.
All right. Who else should I introduce? Jim Patty. Jim Patty, I don't know if I think I think you might be new to us here. I just want to say hello and welcome.
Yes, I'm very interested. I have veterans in my family. I'm not a veteran myself, but I was actually failed the draft test. So, I certainly admire and appreciate the work they've done in their lives.
And Jim, that's interesting that you say that because I should let people know I'm not a veteran. Sean Hall next to me here is not a veteran. Ellie DiPastino, my daughter, is not a veteran. And actually Jeff Raker is not a veteran. And yet all of us work in the veterans community and have, I think, been inspired continually by veterans. And, our mission with the Veterans Breakfast Club is to get veterans to share their stories with the public so we could all connect and heal and educate and inspire. And we do this with programs like this that just have veterans from every background and branch of service and era join us. And it's just absolutely fascinating. The other thing that's fascinating is the collection of people we get around these stories. This is really a community here around veterans and stories. And I'm looking at the Zoom screen and I see, our senior World War II veteran, Julia Parsons, is with us. Hello, Julia. Turned 100 Navy Wave in World War II, turned 100 in March. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have 13, maybe 14-year-old Henry Shepke from Madison, Wisconsin, who probably should be doing homework tonight, but he's joining us. Thank you from Madison. How are you, Henry? I haven't seen you in a while.
I'm doing good. How are you?
Very good. Did you hear at all, had you ever heard about missing Marines or history flight, about this effort to find MIAs around the world? I had not.
I read a little bit about it from the newsletter sent this morning, but before then I hadn't.
You are going to be interested in this, I know, and I thank you, Henry, for joining us. This sounds like something really up your alley, and I do want to start. I'm going to start with Geoff and Missing Marines, and have him kind of share his story of the work that he's done. But I also see that Marianne Raymer is with us. And Marianne, I know that Marianne is with AARP, and I know that you have a career event coming up on Friday, I believe, correct?
Yes, we do, Todd. Thank you. If I could just talk a little bit about this career job series that AARP is doing. And on Friday, we're going to have a representative from the national office talk about all the resources that AARP can offer veterans who are in the midst of a job search. So I know that many of the people here look like they're perhaps enjoying retirement, but they may have...
That's a very nice way of saying...
Yeah, Marianne, what are you trying to say?
enjoying retirement.
I wish I had your tact, Marianne. That's a perfect
awesome.
way of...
I can't believe you would talk about Ellie like that already.
Ellie's worked very hard in the last couple of years. She probably deserves retirement. But anyway, if you do have people in your family that, perhaps are veterans and are, in the midst of looking for a job, we have a program that's going on noon on Friday. And I can put it up here in the chat what the registration is. I know that I shared some things over with Todd. I don't know if you have that ready. Oh, thank you, Todd. If you go to the bottom here where it says aarpcvent.com/Veterans Career Ladder Series, you can register for the program. Of course, it is free. And, we're welcoming veterans to use the free resources of AARP. So we hope we see you.
Okay, and I am putting that registration information in the chat here on the Zoom side. I also put the flyer here on the Zoom side. That is Friday, May 14th.
No, that's May 7th.
Oh, there's another one before. I
Yes.
copied the wrong one. Okay.
Yeah.
There's another one coming up May 7th at
Right.
noon, and you could register, but the registration link is the same.
It is.
Yes, I will add these two here, and we'll also pass them along. Ellie, let's make sure that we share this on our Facebook page. All right, in our social media. And I could actually, I'll forward that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you have it in the chat, so you could post it. Thank you so much, Ellie, for doing that. And thank you, Marianne, for joining us. And you'll be back with us on Wednesday morning also to remind people about it, correct?
I will. Thank you, Todd.
Oh, right, yeah.
Thanks for having me. I always love these programs.
Oh, they're so great. They're so fascinating. Does anybody else have anything else to announce? I see Carl Curtis. I see, Larry Googans. Any events or any I don't know, any cause that you're involved in that you want to announce? Please do feel free to put the information here in the chat, and we could also share it on the Facebook side. All right. Well, let me introduce Geoff. Jeffrey Raker. He's an interesting guy. How are you, Geoff?
I'm doing well today. Thank you for having me.
I spent a part of today looking at your website, and I'm going to show it to people here because it's so impressive, the work that you've done with missingmarines.com. You could, since all of you are old and retired, you have plenty of time to go. That was a joke. It was a joke. You have plenty of time, like I did today, to go on missingmarines.com and click around. It's so interesting. This is your site, and you'll be talking about this, but it's you scroll down, and what you can do is click the stories of these missing Marines, and you've done all this research of who they were, what their backgrounds were, the time and cause of death, and any eyewitness accounts, and where their remains might be, and there's so much information here. And I asked you, do you do that? You can't do this all yourself, do you? And you said, yes, I do. And I said, how in the world do you do that? And you said, I don't sleep. No, because you have
ignore most other things.
You ignore most others. I mean, you have a full-time job. You're a creative director at an ad agency in Manhattan.
Yes, that's correct. I also have a family. I have a 2-year-old. He's wonderful. So that also was just a joke. I'm not ignoring my family. I spend as much time with them as I possibly can. But yeah, a lot of the most of my spare time goes into working on this website, and there's a companion site for the 1st Battalion, 24th Marines. I've been working on a history of them as well.
Right.
So it's plenty to keep me occupied. Several thousand names to study.
Several thousand names to study and research. You also wrote a book, and I do want to. I will share that. But can I ask you first, how in the world, you're not a veteran, how did you get interested in this subject? How did you get hooked?
So I have, yes, I'm not a veteran, but I did have several family members who served, particularly in the Second World War. My great-granduncle was a lieutenant commander. His name was Edmund Billings. He served on the USS Quincy. He was killed in the Battle of Savile Island, right in the very opening part of the Guadalcanal campaign. Went down with the ship. Remains were never recovered. So I have an MIA in my family. But the one that really got me hooked was this guy's name is Sergeant Arthur Irvin, and he had served with a Marine ancestor of mine, whose letters I got as a graduation present from college. So reading all of his letters got me interested in the story of his battalion, which was the 1st Battalion, 24th Marines, and trying to find all of the men who had served in his platoon and then in his company, clued me into the story of Arthur Irvin, and that was really what got this started.
And here he is. And Geoff, do you have a these images? I don't want to kind of step on your presentation. Do you have a presentation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I'm a newbie here, so I might have overdone it on the prep, but hopefully y'all will bear with me. It's
we
better.
Certainly will bear with you.
You can look at something that's not just me going on and on and on.
Well, let's hear, Ellie, if you want to make Geoff co-host.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen now with the green button at the bottom of the screen.
Alrighty. Can everyone see?
Yeah.
Alrighty.
That's a great picture.
Thank you. So this picture was taken on Saipan. So we'll be talking a lot about Saipan today, which was a battle in 1944 involving the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, also the 27th Army Infantry Division, plus attached units. This picture was taken during the battle, and unfortunately, I don't know what became of this individual. This is a really well-marked grave, so they were probably collected by graves registration, but that's speculation for another time. So I kind of wanted to start talking about missing Marines with a couple of numbers. There were 24,511 USMC casualties during the Second World War.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Geoff, but on my end, at least, it's a very big screen. I can't quite see all the words.
Well, here, let me... Is that better?
That's better. That's
all right. We can just do it in here and then
Yep.
All
That's
right.
good.
Just don't peek over in this corner.
Okay.
All right. So 24,511 total Marine casualties. Of those, the DPA lists 2,695 are non-recovered currently. That's as of a couple of days ago, that maps out to about 11%. So we figure if you were a Marine casualty, fatal casualty in World War II, you had a better than 10% chance that your body was not going to be recovered, brought back to your family. Missing Marines is tracking currently about 2,950 cases. That number kind of goes up and down based on new information whenever it comes in. Some cases have long been filed incorrectly as they've been found decades ago or were buried at sea and were mistakenly labeled originally as not accounted for. Also, I'm including in my count attached naval corpsmen and losses that took place within the bounds of the continental United States. As far as I know, there's not a complete listing of the CONUS losses, so I'm kind of working on building that as I go. But it's a pretty extensive number. A lot of air crew who went down at sea. But yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about Arthur Irvin. Here he is. So Arthur was born in McCurtain, Oklahoma in 1922. He was from a mining family, youngest of three. His father died in a mine explosion in McCurtain when Arthur was just a few months old. He grew up with a succession of stepfathers, multiple blended families. He has a lot of half-brothers, half-sisters, step-siblings. He was raised in Florida County, Oklahoma, Red River County, Texas. We don't know too terribly much about his early life. He did complete grammar school and part of high school in Los Angeles. He moved there with one of his older brothers who went out there to join the Navy. In 1940, his mother's second husband passed away. He moved back to Texas, to the small town of Detroit, to help support his mom. May have gone back to school, may have just worked as a laborer. Records kind of differ there, but either or, he decided that the Marines were the way to go, and he enlisted on 4th of June, 1940, at the age of 18. And here he is, brand new Marine. He attended boot camp at San Diego. His first assignment was to the Naval Air Station at Pearl Harbor. He got into some trouble there. He and a friend were arrested for, I think, euphemistically saying they had borrowed a civilian's car, and then they broke into a bar down in Waikiki Beach and were turned in, and they were thrown in the brig, pending some fairly serious charges. So he was there at the Naval Air Station at the attack on Pearl Harbor. He volunteered to help clear some of the unexploded ordnance from the field. So let him out of the brig to do that. As soon as he was done, they threw him right back in, slapped him with a general court-martial, and sent him and his friend to the Mare Island Naval Prison in January 1942. And this was very nearly the end of his Marine career. However, being that the United States was now in a state of war and they needed Marines, especially those who had had even 18 months of service at the time, he got let out on probation. And they said, you keep a clean record for 6 months and we'll take this off of we'll clear your record right up. provided that you deploy to a combat unit. So he and his friend James Coop is the one on the left here, both volunteered to go to E2 22nd Marines. Coop, I should also mention, was sort of his co-conspirator in the car theft and burglary. The two of them were together from boot camp for, although pretty much as far through as they could go. While he was in the 22nd Marines, he met the fellow on the right. This is just a little point of interest for anyone who's a Civil War scholar. That man is Edwin Barse, the well-known Civil War historian who just passed away.
Oh my gosh.
That's Ed Barse. They were squad buddies in the 22nd, and then all three of them went to the 3rd Raider Battalion in September of 1942 because they were bored sitting on Samoa. So they went and volunteered. They all participated in the invasion of the Russell Islands, the occupation of Pavuvu, Operation Clean Slate, February 43, which was unopposed landing, but it was their first experience doing an actual combat operation. They occupied Pavuvu for a while, and anyone who's seen the series The Pacific knows how miserable Pavuvu was, so you can imagine being the first ones there, not a particularly pleasant place to be. Especially in terms of mosquitoes and disease, because Arthur contracted filariasis, which is pretty close to elephantiasis. So he had swelling in all sorts of uncomfortable places, and his legs would go dead on him, he said, and so he was transferred out of the Raiders. This wound up being fortunate because the Raiders went on to go fight, of course, in the Battle of Bougainville. Sergeant Coop was killed there, and I think he was private first class at the time. Barse was badly wounded there with machine gun bullets in the arm, so he evaded fate for a little while. So there was no cure for his filariasis. They sent him back to California because the only thing they could do was to keep it dormant in a drier, cooler climate. Comes back home, gets married, has a bit of a furlough. They send him back to California and they post him to the 24th Marines. Part of the newly formed 4th Marine Division. He's assigned duty as a machine gun squad leader, promoted to corporal. His first experience under actual enemy fire is the Battle of Roy Nemours in February of 1944. People were not sure how he would do in combat because he had a bit of the Raider swagger to him, and everybody else was mostly a bunch of Green Marines, and so he kind of played that angle to the hilt. His men said they never knew him to smile or laugh. They said he could piss ice water. Actually, in that first picture of him smiling, I showed that to a veteran friend, and he didn't recognize him at first because he said he was always making expressions sort of like the one he's got on here. However, at Roy Nemours, he is wounded quite seriously twice, and then less seriously a third time, clears out a bunker all on his own, and is receives the Navy Cross in a ceremony in Hawaii in the spring of 1944. So he recovers, comes back to his unit, and then joins the mortar section of A124. This is him on the top picture. He's on the very far left, this one here. Hard to tell. This is the only picture I know of him overseas, and you can't even tell it's him except for the caption on the back. And this tall fellow here, this is my ancestor, Lieutenant Philip Wood, Jr. So the two of them, the lieutenant and the section sergeant, serving together, thick as thieves apparently, despite the differences in rank and very, very different backgrounds. But the big comment was that how they work together better than most officers and senior NCOs. They both land on Saipan, 15th June. Sergeant Irvin volunteers to go lead a patrol to clear out a bypass strongpoint. He's recommended for the Silver Star the 20th of June. Seems like they're going to make it through the battle okay. And then we get to the 5th of July. On this date, they're continuing their sweep up north on the island towards Marpy Point. And as they're firing the mortars, they see a group of civilians are coming out of caves, coming towards the lines to get to the safety of the American lines. Sergeant Irvin and Lieutenant Wood request to take a patrol out there to bring them in. They bring in the first group, and they are told that there are more out there in a cave that are being held by Japanese soldiers, not allowed to surrender. And this, by the way, is actually believed to be a picture of the start of this patrol. I found there's a series of them at the National Archives, but we'll get more into that later. So we hear from their commanding officer, Captain Irving Schechter. that they ran into armed Japanese troops about 30 yards from this cave. Lieutenant Wood was hit first. Sergeant Irvin and a corpsman ran to go to his assistance, and they were both hit. Lieutenant Wood, Sergeant Irvin, 3 other Marines were killed in action, and they were all, recovered to the lines. They managed to push through the ambush, which looked something like this. So this is them moving in here and evacuating some of the wounded from this event. The end result of this patrol was, unfortunately, the deaths of several Marines, but I did also hear from a veteran who participated in the rescue effort on this patrol that they did manage to bring in 60 people, civilians, men, women, children. So I think that was what they set out to do, and they managed to accomplish their mission, even though it did cost them a couple of lives. And again, this is believed to be a picture of some of the people that they brought back in. There were 2 combat photographers on the scene. So the question out of that is now, where is Sergeant Irvin? We know that all of the rest of the men who died on this patrol were buried in the 4th Marine Division Cemetery. Their remains lay there until 1948 when the cemetery was exhumed. They were all returned either back home to their families or sent to the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, except for Sergeant Irvin. So in order to find out where Sergeant Irvin is, or to find out where any missing person is, we start looking at some of the available records. I've been talking for a minute, so I figure maybe I'll pause here and see if anyone's got any questions so far.
Yeah, I bet you people do, but they may want to hear more before they ask. But feel free, if you do have a question, put it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask it. And this hunt all came from the letters
That's where it started, yeah.
That's where it started for you. His letters home? His
letters home, yes. They're all, the ones I received for college was an abridged version that his sister had typed up. When she passed away, the entire collection was found in her condo, and I've typed them all up and annotated them. You can read them all on the 24th Marines website. It covers him from his enlistment when he was a student at Yale all the way up to the condolence letters written after his death. There's about 80 of them.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Carrying on. What I do with missing Marines is very much more on the research end. I do a lot of the kind of like quiet sitting in the library, headphones on, looking at the old documents sort of thing. Justin will talk more about the actual realities of going out into the field and looking for these guys. But I wanted to kind of walk you guys through this process because this is something that, this is a skill that I've kind of built up over the years, but it's something that pretty much anybody can do. All of these records are available to the public if you know where to look and how to request them, and kind of more importantly, how to read them. So this is a little bit of a primer for anybody who might be interested in getting into this someday, because we could use your help. The big ones to look at, and this is outside of, say like newspaper accounts from the time, or census records, all that stuff's very important. We're going to focus more on the military aspect. Muster rolls, casualty cards, the official military personnel file called the OMPF, individual deceased personnel file, IDPF, and an X file. And we'll explain a little bit about what each of those are. So this is an example of a World War II era muster roll. This is kind of the first step, primary source. These are extremely accurate. The Marines use them. They're primarily used, obviously to tell who's present when and where. And that's very important when you're calculating who gets paid for what. And if you remember, the Corps is coming out of the Depression era, where they've had to fight for every single dollar that they get. They ran an extremely tight ship when it came to their budget and who got paid for what. So the dates on these are usually pretty good. If you find a conflict with a date someplace else, you usually tend to default to the muster rolls. Some of the basic information you get in here is the name. You get the name, obviously, rank, service number, MOS, military occupational specialty. For those who don't know what that means at all, the veterans, I'm sure you all probably recognize the 4-digit system. There was a 3-digit one in the 40s, which is this code here. So if we look at Sergeant Irvin, we've got his service number, 285038. 652 is a section leader. He was a mortar section sergeant. In the event of death, the cause and disposition of remains. So first of the 4th, participated in the Battle of Saipan, Marianas Islands, died of wounds on the 5th, and character excellent, remains unknown. So this is a big red flag right here. Right above him is Technical Sergeant Richardson, who was killed on the same patrol. And you can see here has a notation of a very specific burial location in the division cemetery on Saipan. So from there, you can get his casualty card. These are all held with the Marine Corps History Division at Quantico. Again, you just write to the folks there, and they can look it up for you. These provide a much more detailed synopsis of injuries, wounds, fatal incidents, and they tend to be compiled from a wider variety of sources. They can be, as you can see here, this one's been annotated quite a bit. They can be, sometimes they contradict, but they're good for verifying information from other sources. So this was Sergeant Irvin's casualty card. It lists both his wounds at Roy Nemours and then his final status as KIA. Official military personnel file. If you can get a hold of these for any servicemen in your family, I highly, highly recommend it. They're usually upwards of 100 pages long. They're going to be hard to get for a little while because the National Archives has been closed for a while, and they've got a backlog that's going to take them a real long time to clear out. But it's always worth the wait, no matter who you're looking for. This is basically the entire service history of the individual. They follow from their pre-enlistment paperwork. These are a couple of pages from Sergeant Irvin's service records. Follows them through their discharge, beyond if they've had correspondence with government agencies relating to their service up to I've seen notes from veterans and their families going up to the 90s in here. So they do kind of keep these files ongoing. This is a big one for anybody who's doing MIA research. It's got a lot of good physical characteristics. It's got a fingerprint file here, which is not so helpful for us today, but was very helpful back in the 40s. And it will include also their medical history, including their dental files, but these are not always released to the general public. I think they've tightened it to the point where they were releasing to veterans only. They may do to direct next of kin. So unfortunately, because dental is a big part of what you want to look at for MIA stuff, that can be a bit of a stumbling block, but this is usually really fascinating. Fortunately, there's the IDPF, which is an abbreviated file. It's a lot of the same information is duplicated in the OMPF, so this is kind of a more stripped down, easy to access file. It really concerns itself just with information concerning the individual's death or disappearance, and their final disposition. It will also generally include dental records. So either very basic ones. So these are both from Sergeant Irvin's IDPF. This file would have been issued to a team who was searching for him after the war, the Form 371. And they would have had, this is taken from his original service record. So this shows his record of his dental treatment during the war. And then you have the X-file. So X-files pertain to recovered remains that are considered unidentifiable. This will be, includes anthropological information, very crucially where remains were found, any attempts that were made at identification, and where they're currently buried. So this is for any team that has gone out in the 1940s when they were out performing most of their post-war searches. Anybody who could be found who was not identifiable, didn't have any means of ID on them, had one of these files created for them. There are sometimes photographs, as you can see here. This is a picture from an MIA from Tarawa, and notes about personal effects, other data. X244, I'm glad to say, is one of the individuals who was recently identified, so he has been brought home to his family, I think, in the last year or two. So, when I kind of first started doing this, one of my other questions was, well, how come there wasn't better information taken at burial? Why could you not just look at, you know, how could there be so many open questions? So I did, in researching for my book, I wound up getting pretty deep into the history of the graves registration process. There was a manual out, technical manual 10360 graves registration, a little bit dry. If you need some kind of good bedtime reading, I would recommend it. Or if you get really into this, also pretty good, but a little bit niche, I would say. According to the rules kind of laid out there, you were to bury one ID tag on the body, one on the marker. If the tags are present, if they weren't, you would attempt to look through the person's, pockets, any belongings that they had. You'd look for marks in their clothing, other identifying media, if they were wearing jewelry of any kind. Fingerprints to be taken, if practicable, is specified, because sometimes they're either too badly decomposed or the hands are, in several cases, missing, and for whatever reason you can't do it. And then you were supposed to fill out a form, graves registration form number 1, which you can see some over here, and I apologize that these are a little bit small. But these are for 2 other MIAs, believed to be members of Irvin's battalion, filled out from Saipan. And these 2 men, actually, they did have personal effects found with them. Both were wearing rings. This one had an inscription billed from Eloise, which I think is the key to identifying who he is, but he's a separate story. And then, so I'm want to give a warning for the next one. This next photo is going to show them actually burying a body on Saipan 4th Marine Division Cemetery, and I think it's important to kind of recognize the challenges that we're facing the graves registration teams and what they had to deal with. So fair warning, this next picture is a bit on the graphic side. So if you feel the need, you may look away. But this is the burial of 2 Marines in the 4th Marine Division Cemetery around the time that Sergeant Irvin and his comrades would have been interred there. Their bodies have been brought back from the front line on the LBTA. They're stacked up here, and they're being buried one by one. Over here, you can see these are probably POWs performing the actual labor. So what's kind of key about this in Sergeant Irvin's case is, firstly, it's very difficult to take a physical description of remains that have been deceased for even a short amount of time in tropical conditions. And the other point to make here is that there are probably no people from these men's company or who knew them present at this burial. So if there's any question about their identity, there's nobody there to say, this is so-and-so, I know him, this is how I know it's him. So they would have hoped that these 2 had their tags on or were able to be identified by other means, or they would have been labeled as unknown. So to build a case for Sergeant Irvin, we can get his known physical characteristics from a service record book. We know what unit he served with. We know the date and the location of his death. We know the cause of his death from records in his OMPF, gunfire while on patrol. Some veterans have said it was a gunshot wound in the head. You can't always fully trust a memory from this many decades later, but that's usually, you should never fully discount it either. And there is reason to believe that he was buried in the 4th Marine Division Cemetery, according to that condolence letter from Captain Schechter. So a good place to start is looking at the burial chart of the cemetery. And this is kind of where this case, at least for me, takes a hard right turn out of the realm of mystery into the realm of can potentially be solved. So we have here Sergeant Richardson, Lieutenant Wood, Davis Cruz, Lawrence Knight. We know from the letter from his commanding officer, I visited Phil's grave several times. He's buried in the 4th Marine Division Cemetery on Saipan. Next to him lie his buddies Sergeant Irvin, First Sergeant Richardson, and Private First Class Knight. Sergeant Richardson, Lieutenant Wood, Davis Cruz did not get a mention in the letter, unfortunately, and PFC Knight. One person is unknown, X64. So unless the captain is kind of fabricating this additional detail about Sergeant Irvin, we now have a clue to look for the X file of X64 Saipan. So if you do that, this is X64. Unfortunately, it's one of the sparser ones. No pictures, very, very little information. The report of interment doesn't have anything. It has all the hallmarks of being one that was sort of filled out after the fact. Either the original one was too badly damaged or it was just not present. Sometimes they weren't buried or they couldn't find them. The anthropologists took a look at him after the war and they decided he was about 5'4", maybe light brown hair. That's not an exact match for Irvin, who was 5'7" and had dark brown or black hair, but it's within the realm of error, considering that we're looking at we're taking measurements from long bones here. You'll notice the skeletal diagram, which may indicate a bullet wound in the head or not. It would be hard to speculate definitively from here, but that was a noticeable trauma that was called out in the 1940s. And this one includes 2 dental charts, which is interesting. So I think one was probably taken in the field when they exhumed the remains in the 1940s, and this one was done at the laboratory. So from taking that, and you look at Irvin's original dental record, again, it's not an exact match, because if it had been an exact match, he would have been solved a long time ago, but there are definitely some pretty severe similarities here. If you compare, for example, the pattern of cavities on this tooth versus this tooth, or the fact that he's got a filling here and here, that these 2 teeth have been extracted. So that would be a question like, what's this one doing? But it's very close. So based on this would not have been enough. Obviously, it wasn't enough in the 1940s for them to draw a conclusion and say, this is definitively Arthur Irvin. They did a double-blind test where they ran the information past multiple teams. They had no access to the original records because they didn't want anybody to be presupposing the conclusion. But since we now have the advantages of DNA testing and that sort of thing, I have a feeling this is a pretty compelling case. So going from here, we can say that X64 is a likely match based on circumstances of his death, where he was buried, his physical characteristics, and the dental chart not gonna fly for an official ID. If they do, the DPAA, the Defense POW MA Accounting Agency, are the ones who will make the final call on that. If they do decide to proceed with exhuming X64, they would probably take a chest X-ray of him, intake records. A lot of these guys had their X-rays taken to screen for tuberculosis, other tests, but really the only way that they're going to be able to confirm it positively is the mitochondrial DNA from a relative descendant on a mother's side. So anytime you go into this sort of a process, knowing that you're gonna, as you're working on your research, you kind of also need to be working at the same time on finding living relatives, because they're going to be the ones who can provide the DNA sample there and who can really do the advocating that's necessary to get this case, to even get a case considered in many instances. So unfortunately, I'm still waiting for Sergeant Irvin. I've been in touch with members of his family, descendants of his brothers. I was in touch with his last remaining half-sister for a couple of years, and she unfortunately passed away in 2018. Still kind of waiting for her big brother to come home. So it does feel like there's a bit of a timestamp on a lot of these cases, where you want to try to get them done thoroughly and accurately, but also as quickly as you can, because there are families out there who've been waiting for these guys for decades, and we kind of owe it to them to get as many back as we can. And this concludes the symposium.
Oh, right. You can stop sharing so we can see you again. And
absolutely.
What I love that you focused on one person. Because times all that information, all that research, all that meticulous study for one person, times that by 82,000, and you get a sense of the scale of the labor
Yeah.
that goes into this.
It's true, and it's you figure everybody has a story like that to tell, right? You can look at the big wall of names at in Manila, or at the Punch Bowl, or really at the end of the Vietnam Memorial, and it's impressive and humbling, and you kind of sit there quietly and think about it. But once you start kind of digging into their backstory and kind of bringing them to life a little bit, that really drives it home. And then a lot of these files have got correspondence from families, from parents after the war, who are trying to find out what happened to their son. They're saying, his wife is remarried, she doesn't want anything more to do with it, or can you send the records to me? Or sometimes it's the wife who's saying, it's like his parents are really obstructing, I want to have him brought back.
Right.
But you just see these really impassioned pleas for more information, or just any sort of hope or guidance at all, and they get back form letters, because that's really all that could be done. You figure the scale of the identification effort after the war was so massive. They had 79,000 they had 400,000, I think, KIAs in World War II, and they had to try to account for all of them. So the fact that there were 79 at the end of the war, 72 today, kind of gives you an idea of, you can't fault the teams in the 1940s too much. It's tempting to when you get really close to it, but you think about how much work they had to do on kind of very minimal training and on a timetable. So people wanted to get over the war; they wanted to be done.
They sure did. Yeah, they sure did. And you would think that, so it sounds like to have the positive identification, it's really going to take a DNA match,
Yes.
which is going to take exhuming the remains, or maybe they have a sample already and comparing it to a relative from the female side. And Ron Sachin put here in the chat, is there any cooperation with the ancestry companies that run these DNA tests? Are they involved in these DNA matching projects?
They are not, to my knowledge. They the DPAA takes in samples. I don't think they wouldn't be able to take unsolicited ones. So I don't think like 23andMe could send in a collection of all their information. So it kind of falls on the researcher to find this family and then to reach out and contact them and say, hey, I've been really involved in your personal family history. Would you want to send a DNA sample to the government? And you can sort of imagine how that goes over.
You've done that, it sounds like.
I have had that conversation a couple of times. I'm not very good at it, so I try to outsource it a little bit to folks who've got more experience.
Right.
Yeah, I do. I have a lot of really great kind of colleagues in the field, Justin included, but a lot of folks, I think maybe some of them are on this call, so if you are, but who have really, they're the real wizards at genealogy, and they've sort of perfected the system for kind of getting that kind of crucial next step in there.
Let me bring in Justin LeHew in this discussion. He's a Marine, as I've said before, but he's also the COO of History Flight, and it sounds like, my understanding is, Geoff and Justin, Geoff, you do the kind of the book research, the archival research, the records. But Justin, have you actually gone to these sites in the South Pacific and done digging for the actual remains?
I have, Todd, and thanks. I think it's a perfect segue with what Geoff had said before, because I want to give a shout out to Geoff. If you haven't picked up, a lot of people, you don't have to be a veteran to actually serve your country in a specific way. And Geoff is a perfect example of someone who has these niche set of skills, that is very passionate about what they do, and has chosen to apply those skills in the service of their nation in this capacity, which is providing closure to families after 77, 78, 79 years in a lot of cases, in which there were 4, 5, and 6 other attempts long before Geoff came around in the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s. And just for one reason or another, Todd, those didn't pan out, or they went to a certain level and that cold case kind of stopped. And then along comes someone like Geoff and this band of researchers and enthusiasts who are passionate about what they do. And this is not to make light of it, is one of my favorite things in the world is like to get back after the pandemic is like Comic-Con. If you know, Comic-Con is America, and it is this demographic of people from all walks of life who are lawyers, doctors, businessmen, veterans, and everything. And for like a week, usually in San Diego, California or something, they dress up like Klingons and they do all this other stuff. And they're passionate about this really niche thing in their life where they are the duty experts of it. And Geoff and this band of researchers that are out there that have taken what I really think are these cold cases, and these are these great American cold cases. These are the things that, you know, you see all these crime shows on TV with all of this stuff, but you don't see a single crime show on TV that's covering the 78,000 cold cases that America has like this that are absolutely fascinating. And the way that Geoff breaks that down, and you nailed it, Todd, you picked up on it, is he described one case in that depth and detail, amplified times almost 80,000 individuals to that level of detail that provides the best opportunity for these families to be able to have this closure and to also fulfill this great American promise that we made to everybody that says we don't leave our fallen comrades behind. We will do everything we can in our power to bring them home. And then you match that passion with an organization of individuals who have military backgrounds, who have academia backgrounds, who are anthropologists, archaeologists, explosive ordnance disposal experts, cadaver dog handlers, investigators in police forces that have worked cold cases throughout America, that you can level all of these talents together. And it's not just American talents, is you can tap into the international base of talents of people that are passionate in their own right to bring their own discipline. And that multifaceted and multi-layered approach that is coming from all angles of where Geoff has built this foundational picture to then have the people with those skills start layering on top of that to apply that in the field, to take that research, go out and investigate, go out and knock on people's houses and walk in villages. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I found who better to do that than the troops that we have and the veterans and disabled veterans and people who have walked the villages of Afghanistan and Iraq and have built schools in those areas and have bonded in the Republic of Vietnam with going in and trying to find out, one, what can we do to help you and increase your thing? And secondly is, you know, where's the enemy at? And how can you help us help you to do that? And this multifaceted and multi-layered approach, Todd, whether it's in the Pacific, whether it's in the Northern Atlantic, a lot of those things that most people don't realize is roughly of those 80,000 some cases, there is approximately about 29,000 of those that are actionable intelligence items that there is a large probability of return on those investigations like Geoff is talking about. Okay, Justin, that's 29,000. That's not 80,000. Okay? People don't understand the scope of loss in the United States Navy alone in World War II, where entire ships disappeared in the middle of the night. Whether it's the USS Indianapolis, who is on orders to steam under secrecy and make no radio contact because they are delivering parts of the Manhattan Project to try to end the war. and then it gets torpedoed by the I-75, and all those sailors go in the water for 5 days in shark-infested waters. Amplify the USS Indianapolis by the 5 Solomon brothers on the USS Juno, on the USS Arizona, with 1,000 loss of life to do that. The naval casualties make up a preponderance of what Geoff is talking about. And a lot of those, unfortunately, are deep water casualties that the ship alone is considered a final resting place and a war grave to not be disturbed. Right. A lot of the things that Geoff was talking about are now your air loss casualties and your ground loss casualties, and the scope of what the American Graves Registration Unit had to do. And you heard Geoff talk about that at the end. I've been in the business a little while after the 31 years, and a lot of times you start with the research, what's been done before. And that's the first question you ask. And then you go find someone like Geoff and ask, what are we missing? And then you take that and you layer on top of that. It's very easy with 2020 vision to point fingers at a bunch of people between 1945 and 1949. They had to go all around the world in this really massive scope of 400,000 casualties around there. With the limited amount of money in 1945, America's broke from fighting these wars, and they say, go out there and find what you can. And a lot of people are quick to point out that the American Graves Registration Unit didn't do a good job, or they glanced over things, or they did this. I happen to believe that with the parameters that they were given, they gave the best effort that they possibly could with the resources and the time frame that they had to do what they had to do for their piece of the puzzle. And now we're sitting in 2021, and we have forensics and everything else that they could never have imagined back then that can now amplify that. And Geoff nailed a piece of that with mitochondrial DNA. And Todd, you brought up a good thing of, is that kind of the primary source that people have to have that DNA to get these matches that are here? That is one. There is another thing. If you have families that don't want to give the DNA, or you have that kind of thing that you heard Geoff say, if you remember the skeletal chart images that Geoff put up, that kind of looked like a hand-drawn skeleton with some colored in areas that are on there, there's also probabilities of identification. When you layer this multifaceted and layer approach on top of this, that basically says you take a lot of the burial records that Geoff had, you take those individual firsthand accounts that you heard Geoff talking about, and he said sometimes that veterans' accounts aren't the most, they're not the most credible. And I can tell you, being a veteran for 31 years, I cooked very good journals along the way. But if you ask me what happened on a specific day at a specific time, when I had all this other crap going on around it, I may have missed a lot of particulars that when you break down after action reports and everything's afterwards, that those do make more sense. But you don't discount what the veteran had to say, because I will tell you what the veteran gives you, that none of those papers or someone like Geoff, even though he gives a great picture on the day in the life of a U.S. Marine on Saipan in 1944. Other than 1944, I'm the guy that's in those black and white photographs. Mm-hmm. The sights, the smells, what it's like to dump those casualties wrapped in that burial shroud inside of that thing that match with the things that Geoff is doing. It's the veteran's story that can be taken to say, on that date and time frame, we had already fought at this point. We were lack of food, lack of chow, lack of ammunition. It was 95 degrees that was out there. And you give the researchers this other facets and pieces to build that picture. And it is fascinating on that website, like you said, Todd. if you go around Geoff's website on missing Marines, it's not just an old black and white photo. It is, you can feel what it was like when one of these Marines went to prom, or they were the captain of the high school football team. And now the girlfriend that dated them, that is 93 years old, that has went on to marry 2 more individuals, that says that was the love of their life at that time. And they went that. Those accounts cannot be discounted because they all make up a piece of this fabulous puzzle.
I'm going to interrupt you for
then goes into my now.
Justin, I want to interrupt you for just a second to get people's attention to these numbers. And I'm assuming these are for Tarawa, Guadalcanal. About 3,000 unaccounted for. About 162 have been accounted for since 2011 in the past 10 years. That's a pretty small number accounted for, maybe 5, 6, 7%. That's the kind of intensive work it takes to have a positive ID. Can I interrupt just to ask you, because you are on the ground in some of these places, like Guadalcanal, in the South Pacific, when you are able to make that match, when you are able to get that evidence and it all locks together, like that puzzle, that missing piece of the puzzle, what kind of exhilaration do you feel after working so hard to try and find a match? You get it and you're able to send the family a positive ID.
When you were standing out there with this multifaceted team that is coming from all walks of life, that are working this, as somebody in Boston would say, this wicked hard problem for America, and this house divinely blows down in early 2019, that is a search area on Tarawa that people have been requesting to search there for years. And they were denied to search there. Whatever it was, the makeup of whatever the researchers were saying compared to whatever the government was saying, the researchers, it was being applied somewhere else. And there's a house sitting on top of about 32 U.S. Marines missing graves on Tarawa. And is now known as the Lost Row D of Cemetery 33. And private organizations and the government had went back and forth for years arguing over whether Row D even existed. And at times people had said that there may have been a Row D, but it was still about 500 meters away from that search area. So this thing, and this house is kind of preventing you from going in and ground truthing what that is. And we got a call in roughly January of 2019 that said a big tropical storm went through Tarawa and magically destroyed the house that was arguable over the past few years. We called the Department of Defense and said, we have a target of opportunity now. Can we go ahead and issue a search team that's over there to do some test kitting? And Todd, within 24 hours, one of our scientific recovery experts did a test kit on that site that people had wanted to for years, and within 24 hours had basically struck the middle of this row of these missing individuals that were about at 120 centimeters below the surface. So you're just over feet in Tarawa. And if you read the stratigraphy, which is how you kind of read the dirt layers in Tarawa, Tarawa is fascinating because the majority of all the growth on this Pacific island in the middle of nowhere, that for 76 hours was completely leveled across the thing, to where there was not a palm tree or a structure standing. After the war, indigenous peoples throughout outlying islands kind of came in and started to repopulate this island. And then the Australians moved in, the New Zealanders, and they start building on top of this. And then what happens is the biggest thing on Boucher Island on Tarawa is the main reason that the Marines went there to begin with, and it had an airfield on that thing. And the main road that goes in and out of Tarawa, there's only one road that goes onto the island and one road that leaves, is the main airstrip from the 1940s that is now paved over. That's the ingress and egress road. And then there's another triangular road on Tarawa that's above that road that still exists today. That was the auxiliary runways of that area that went out to the pier. And this island is only about a mile long and 800 meters wide. And that is all still there today. But the problem is there's about 45,000 people that live on top of that. The vegetation, the houses, and we had this house fall. And when we went over and tested that, and we went down, we had what Geoff kind of explained was, we had the National Archives picture of burial records, individuals that were known to be in that area, and we even had actual chaplains' handwritten notes from 1943 between November of the 20th and the 23rd on where the chaplains kind of put people in the ground to the best that they could do. And we put all that together, and when we struck pay dirt that was on there, we then started excavating per person to the left and to the right of that to see the scope of your operations. And the average shoulder span of an individual was 0.75 meters. And the way that the Marines had buried them was about 4 feet down in a bulldozer-sized trench. And we actually still had veterans' reports on Tarawa that said a 93-year-old bulldozer operator in Michigan said, Justin and Mark, this is where I buried these guys. And this is the trench I dug. And when you get to the end of my trench, you'll know you're at the end of my trench because we bulldozed the Japanese soldiers at the end of that trench that kind of closed off the last Marine that we buried in that trench that was there. And as that started playing out, we found that as we started opening up more and more ground, and you read the stratigraphy, which is how you look at the geology, and Tarawa has a trash layer that is on top of it that the locals have operated within the past 40 or so years that are there. And then you dig this trash layer and you strip this off top and you hit this beautiful 8-inch pristine white coral layer that goes across. And what that was is that was the crushed coral that the CDs pushed on there to make the actual runways in 1941. Right underneath that coral layer, you see this pitch black layer. And that is what we call the battle layer. That is where that island was burnt to a singe for those 76 hours. Right underneath that little battle layer is the most pristine white sand, pure white sand you've ever wanted to see in your life that is undisturbed. And it's almost like sealing these Marines in a crypt. And when you get to that and you follow the stratigraphy of the burial trench, as soon as you get there, you found the most pristine U.S. Marine soldier and airman recoveries that are inside there at about 0.75 meters. And Geoff showed a few very grisly photos that were on there of the type of decomposition that was happening at that time period when they were burying men at the same time they're fighting the Japanese. And the stifling heat and that's on those islands, first of all, as a Marine, I want to get those bodies out of the view of my Marines as possible, because that is the combat trauma of laying next to my buddy who I went with, and I got to get that out of his mind. So we're going to get that underneath. And then secondly is some of those Marines never made it ashore. And as they jumped off those landing craft 700 meters out, where that coral reef layer was, with all of their equipment, they drowned. And then they had to wade into shore underneath this hellacious Japanese fire. Some of those men floated in that water for days before they could be recovered. And I can only imagine what it was like, and I've been on the burial details. You know, you will see photographs of World War II that show men stripped to their waist that are throwing gas masks on their faces, grabbing these individuals as much as they can to give them the most dignified burial they can. And on Tarawa, on the 20th, 21st, 22nd, you got to figure your best friends are the ones who are burying you, that are out there. At the end of that 76 hours, those Marines are getting on landing craft. They are going back out to the ships. They are loading up, and they are going to the next fight. And then the follow-on forces after that have to come in and then deal with the casualties. And they're not tied probably, you know, God love them. They have a mission first. I need to improve this airfield. I need to build this. The Marines have basically buried their casualties at 42 different spots around this island. And I could only imagine the Seabees under orders that are basically getting their orders that say, I need you to extend the airfield at this position so we can get medium and long range bombers on here by fighters. And I can only imagine a chief petty officer jumping off of a bulldozer, Todd, that has to run over to an officer. And he says that day, we just hit a bunch of bodies over here, boss. What do you want us to do with these? And that officer is probably like, I need you to take them over across the island and consolidate them in the main Marine cemetery where an entity belongs. And therein lies the problem in the Pacific. Because once they started to move and disinter, the records, Todd, just started to go out the window. And that's why you still have an island in the South Pacific, whether it's Guadalcanal, 400 missing men, whether it's Tarawa that had 541 missing men. And every person that's out there, like we started this discussion, everybody said, I had no idea the scope of this thing that was here. That is what prompted Mark Noah to start this years ago when he said, what do you mean we left 541 guys out on a South Pacific island and nobody knows where they're at? And he was never in the military. And he found that, he said, one of the most disturbing things as an American he ever felt in his life. And he said, I knew at that point I needed to do something about that.
Right.
And that tied me in, Geoff in, and everybody else here.
It's unfinished business. I want to invite people to make comments, ask questions, make observations. I don't know if any of you, our veterans, have had to deal with this issue when you were at war, of remains and keeping track and you know, wondering about the return, or maybe it's families. Maybe you've had that issue in your family. I know that we have had that at the Veterans Breakfast Club. We've had family members of people who are missing, presumed dead. And I was struck. It was a couple years ago at our breakfast in Penn Hills here around Pittsburgh. LeHew Boucher, his older brother, who he idolized, was a paratrooper in World War II and never came home from the war, never came home. The remains never came home. And LeHew said, he was maybe 8 years old at the time. He said he was about 17 years old, LeHew, 9 years later after the war, when he finally gave up on the notion that maybe his brother has amnesia and is wandering around Europe and somehow we'll be able to find him. Like that is what you call no closure. That's why one of the reasons why I think remains are so important to identify and account for.
Todd, in 1943, imagine December 24th of 1943. This is Christmas Eve of 1943, when a majority of the Tarawa families received their Western Union telegram delivered to their door on Christmas Eve that said, your son has been killed in action. We're not going to delay these telegrams. We're not going to do anything. They're going to just deliver them. And 1,000+ people. And that's only one small island. in that time period. Amplify that for the war in Europe, the air war, everything else. These are thousands of American families getting this initial telegram on Christmas Eve of 1943 that says, "Merry Christmas, your son has been killed in action. You're not coming home."
Oh my.
The Sullivan family got 5 of those all on one day that said basically your entire genealogy lifespan just got wiped out. All of your sons are not coming home. The scope and the magnitude. So what I found, though, as if that wasn't disheartening enough, some of the more disheartening things are what Geoff pointed out. The years following the war in the National Archives, all of these families and mothers writing General Hal, writing the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Chief of Naval Operations, saying, "Thank you for the insurance money. Our family's been taking care of that, but we want to know where our sons are at." And these men were writing these families back. And then in 1949, as if it wasn't bad enough that you received your telegram that said your son's dead, in 1949, the United States mass mailed all of those missing families around the nation and said, not only was your son killed and we don't know where he's at, the 1949 telegrams told these families, "I now hate to inform you that we're no longer looking for them." And what I found through some of the individuals, we had just done a funeral in California about 3 weeks ago for a Marine private named Jacob Cruz in Los Angeles. And I can have your listeners and everybody just kind of Google Jacob Cruz and you will find this phenomenal news coverage and video of really what America is still today. They hear this stuff that's going on in California and the politics and all this. All the firefighters and police officers stood on every overpass in Los Angeles, California 3 weeks ago and welcomed Jacob's remains home into a barrio to be buried in the Los Angeles National Cemetery, kind of like the Arlington National Cemetery in Los Angeles. And the streets were lined with people and Americans that appreciated this. And Jacob is an immigrant. His families are immigrants, and they have migrated out to East LA. And they do that. And you can see that Jacob's sister rolled out onto the tarmac in a wheelchair and remembered when Jacob went to fight in the 40s. And Jacob's sister was there when he came down the conveyor belt, and in her wheelchair, she got to put her hand on that American flag that covered her brother's remains, coming home after 77 years, of which a country promised her that we would not stop looking for that. That family, as they passed on, the mothers, grandmothers, they would make their siblings promise never stop looking and don't ever give up hope. And then that generation in the 60s died off and never got to see Jacob come home, his mother. To have that sister that was there to be able to put that hand on that casket is, like you had said, on Tarawa, to have that feeling when you open that up and you're standing there and you know, I got you.
I got it.
I got you. And now, as you had heard Geoff say before, I'm not in the business of leaking the positive identification out of the individual that I know that's laying there, because the last thing you ever want is to misidentify an individual that is out there. So our recovery operation happens. We lovingly package up and excavate every individual that's there. And then we do a joint ceremony with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, who flies out to those areas, and we do a battle transfer of these remains. And then they primarily fly to Hickam in Hawaii, and then they go through what you heard Geoff say is the official government DNA testing. And a lot of times that it can take years for that. A lot of times, it doesn't take years. If you have what you had listened to Geoff say, there was a high school class rank that was engraved, it was with the individual. There was a set of dog tags, or there was things called material evidence that said there is a 99% probability that these bones are this individual with these records. And then the government goes out and they have an agreement with the county coroners in Honolulu that says if they have more than like a 99% probability that's who this is, they can layer all that on and then go out and expedite that identification for the coroner to turn around in maybe a matter of weeks or a month to say that's exactly who that is. And then the beautiful thing is they follow the same casualty process like an active duty person who's killed today.
You know, Justin, I think we have 2 volunteers already signed up. Angela is one of them. Hello, Angela. Angela, sadly, a former deputy coroner so she has familiarity with these kind of cases. Could you pass along the question that you had, Angela, in the chat here? Could you ask it?
Certainly. And I had to come in a few minutes late, so I'm sorry if this was explained earlier. But labs like SILHI and, the Armed Forces DNA Identification Lab, how do those factor into these investigations? Because, getting those folks involved, do you take a package to them and say, hey, we have, with a certain level of probability, and then, get help from them to then move on it, or?
I know primarily it's a little bit of the reverse of that. And Geoff might want to kick in on this too, is the AFDIL and everybody else, they really play into the process a lot on the backside. After the remains have been recovered, or say something like Geoff had made the case like he just built on there earlier. And the government says, Geoff, you've made a very compelling case. We're going to put resources toward going to get and recover that individual. The government as a whole at that point normally has the lead and not the labs. And then they will go out to do the excavations, the research, the applied science to get the recovery. Once the recovery happens and you strike possible human remains that are on there through the identified scientific recovery expert that's on the ground, after you report those back, then the people in those labs match with the government on those IDPFs, everything else you heard Geoff talk about, to layer all that on top of. They look and find if they already have DNA on file from a swab from the family that was accepted. And then those labs are now just anxiously, bated breath, waiting for that pelican case of remains to end up in their lab so they can start the actual testing at that point.
Gotcha. Thank you.
That's accurate. And I think so that there's kind of a not a separate set of circumstances, but kind of a distinct one for remains that are buried already in, say, National Cemetery. So the case that we looked at early in the chat for Sergeant Irvin, the remains that are thought to be his X-64 are currently in the Manila American Cemetery. There are several that I've figured out from the research I've done for my book on Guadalcanal. I can say with a fairly good degree of probability are these guys that are in Honolulu. The case I referenced with the ring that was inscribed to Bill from Eloise, he also could probably be in Honolulu. But it's getting a case that's compelling enough and with sort of enough momentum behind it to get them to agree to exhume the remains, and that is usually the most challenging part of all. So the Sergeant Irvin case, we submitted that the first time I think in 2012 or 2013, working with a couple of other groups, and we've sort of resent it a couple of times over the years, but there's never been. It always feels like it kind of dies in committee. You need to get the family involved. You need to start writing to senators and congressmen, and you have to kind of start. It's even a little bit of a pressure game to say, we need you to take a look at this case specifically because they have a lot going on. They're working on. Obviously, they've got remains from all areas of the world, all eras. They've got massive projects going on right now, exhuming the remains from the USS Oklahoma. They've been working on remains from Tarawa, and I think they're starting a big project with unknowns from Cabanatuan, the POW camp in the Philippines. So trying to get your kind of pet project up the ladder can be real hard. So I don't know when they're going to get to Saipan, but I still have my fingers crossed. But yeah, there's a lot of there's sort of a lot of additional kind of machinations you have to do during the research is one thing. It's getting the action taken. That's sometimes the most challenging part of all.
Yes, you could have all the information that you need, but if you don't have the action for that final confirmation, it could delay it indefinitely.
And a lot of things, Todd, is that the Department of Defense, people think that they may have infinite resources and money. They don't. Right.
Exactly.
The Department of Defense primary mission is to still protect the United States of America and project power around the world.
Right. I don't want to end the evening without having Geoff talk a little bit about his book, Leaving Mac Behind: The Lost Marines of Guadalcanal. And I specifically want you to talk about it because of this. I think I started a sentence and never finished it earlier in the program, telling your dad that he should be proud of you. And one of the reasons he should be proud, I think, is this book reflects, of course, the meticulous, painstaking research that you demonstrated just when you were discussing Sergeant Irvin's case. So the book, it's backed with all that meticulous research. But what struck me when I just read the prologue, and I will not say that I read the book, was how beautifully written it was. That surprised me. And that was going to be the first question I asked you. How in the world, because great researchers aren't usually great writers. It's usually you get one or the other. You get a writer who can't do a lick of research because it's boring to them, or you get a researcher who doesn't write well because their head is full of data. It's rare to come across somebody who does both well, and you do both well, Geoff. And I asked you, how is that possible? And you answered it, because you're an ad man.
Yeah, that's true. Day job, I work for an ad agency. I'm a copywriter, so that's definitely helped. I mean, so I started writing first and wrote a whole mess of articles for my websites and everything, and then I went to grad school at Norwich and learned how to actually do research in historical writing, and then I had to go back and delete all the old stuff and redoing a whole lot of it.
Right.
But yeah, no, I don't know. It's a subject that's really close to my heart. So if you're writing about something that you care about a lot, that makes it it's not so hard.
Well, it's a beautifully written book, and I just put the link to it at Amazon here in the Zoom chat if people want to take a look at it, if they want to buy it and read it. Because it's not the dry history that I thought it might be. It's you really bring it to life, and you bring these missing Marines to life, and I think that's the magic of it. Do we have any questions out there or comments from people? Here, I'll look in the chat.
I actually have a question.
Sure.
Do you happen to know the name of Mr. Boucher's brother?
I can get it. Yeah, I have it. Thank you. Yeah, Nancy.
I may have a file for him.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Nancy Lichtman said Geoff is a brilliant writer. I agree.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, then I want to ask Justin just a little bit about his Marine career, because I do find it so interesting. If you Google Justin's name, you'll find a lot of articles about when he retired. It was certainly covered well in the media, and one of the reasons it was covered well is because he's a Navy Cross recipient, and he received a Navy Cross for his valor during the first big battle, first big Marine Corps battle of the Iraq War in 2003, and that was the Battle of Nasiriyah, which is something that we've talked about here in the Veterans Breakfast Club before because we've had veterans of this battle. And specifically, the people here might remember this in the early days of the invasion of the Iraq War. This battle was going to happen. It was, let me show you a map. Nasiriyah is, if I look at my map here, Nasiriyah is down here, more toward the southeast, more towards the Kuwait launch pad for the invasion. This was the route of the 3rd Division, Infantry Division. This was the route of the Marines, and of course the target was Baghdad. They had to go through Nasiriyah, and the Marines were staged there to kind of take the city, but they had to change their plans and had to kind of go in early because of the famous 507th Maintenance Company. Was it a company? Maintenance Company? Right. 507th Maintenance Company, Army Company, got misdirected, and instead of taking, my understanding is, instead of taking Route 1 here, away from Nasiriyah, took Route 8, and not only did that, but I think drove either down Route 7 or down this road through...
The second road that you just highlighted right there.
Right there, Ambush Alley, between two rivers, two bridges right here, and they were able to get kind of through Nasiriyah, came to the other end, and then realized they were lost and turned around and came back, and that's when they got trapped. I think 18 vehicles. I can't remember how many. Maybe it was 18 personnel, 18 soldiers eventually got killed or captured there. And Justin, you were called upon, you and your Marines of Task Force Tarawa were called upon to rescue them, and it's essentially launched the invasion of Nasiriyah earlier than expected, correct?
Yeah, it absolutely was. It was supposed to be in there for the Marine assault positions. It was news to us when we came over the radio that morning when the tanks were engaging the Iraqis outside the city. They reported that there were burning U.S. vehicles that they had just passed. And we were, I mean, people say that they're the spearhead of things all the time. They are. This group truly was a spearhead. I mean, they were the spearhead into Iraq. They had already covered 300 miles of ground for the past 2 days, and were tasked with securing the two bridges in that city of 500,000 people in order for remaining armed forces to be able to keep coming to Baghdad. And that Army supply column maintenance unit just happened to kind of fall behind the rest of them. And when they were moving up that Route 8, and they should have just followed Route 8 all the way out, it was there, they managed to miss the other part of the convoy and take a right turn that morning. And they went up through the city. The Iraqis kind of looked at them like, what's going on? There was no fire going on at that time. And then they made the very unfortunate mistake once they got north of that city where it says Northeast Bridge on there. They looked at each other. They kind of didn't know where to go from there. And they figured the best point of action would be to go back the same way that they just came to connect with Route 8 again. And that is when they started coming back into the city. That's when a city of 500,000 people said, you know, kind of fool me once, you know, shame on me, fool me twice. Right. And the whole city came out and just hit them up. And they made it the best that they could. They drove the Ambush Alley area, and they made it south of the railroad bridge again and escaped out of that kill zone. But unfortunately, they got shot up so bad that they got split into two columns. And at the time, they had a large percentage of their force captured and wounded that were on that, to include Jessica Lynch, Lori Piestua, quite a few others that were there. And I got specifically called in to say, Justin, we kind of know how you are, so get up there. There's some missing soldiers, and this unit got the butt kind of handed to them. Can you get up there and kind of figure out what you can figure out? And we went up there. I went up to the lead element of where the tanks were firing and they were engaging. They were the last unit that saw that unit in action. And I jumped up on a tank and peeled off one of the tank commander's helmets and said, "Did you see anybody before here?" And he said, "I think we saw some people right behind us." And no sooner than I had said thank you and kind of jumped outside that tank, that main tank gun went off. It was the best feeling I ever had in my life. It was like 10 roller coasters all at one time, getting blown off the side of a tank. And then the tankers look down at you and start laughing to see if you're okay. And you look up at them and with this big smile on your face. that was awesome. You get in your vehicles and then you go find the soldiers. And when we found the soldiers, they were pretty shot up. They did the best thing that they could, from my opinion, when they were there. And it made a couple of wagon wheels with their casualties in the center of it. And they were about to get overrun again by Iraqi infantry pushing through the field. And I don't believe at that point until we arrived, they could have held off one more attack. And all of them either would have been killed or captured at that point.
And at this point, you're a gunnery sergeant. You're a 15-year veteran of the Marine Corps. And this was just the beginning of your Iraq War. You would go on, I've read, of course, to receive a Bronze Star with Valor. But I thought I would show the Navy Cross citation for that day, March 23rd. The President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Navy Cross to Gunnery Sergeant Justin D. LeHew, United States Marine Corps, for extraordinary heroism as Amphibious Assault Platoon Sergeant, Company A, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, Task Force Tarawa, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom on 23rd and 24th March 2003. As Regimental Combat Team 2 attacked north towards Nasiriyah, Iraq, lead elements of the battalion came under heavy enemy fire. When the beleaguered United States Army 507th Maintenance Company convoy was spotted in the distance, Gunnery Sergeant LeHew and his crew were dispatched to rescue the soldiers. Under constant enemy fire, he led the rescue team to the soldiers. With total disregard for his own welfare, he assisted the evacuation effort of 4 soldiers, 2 of whom were critically wounded. While still receiving enemy fire, he climbed back into his vehicle and immediately began suppressing enemy infantry. During the subsequent company attack on the eastern bridge over the Euphrates River, Gunnery Sergeant LeHew continuously exposed himself to withering enemy fire during the 3-hour urban firefight. His courageous battlefield presence inspired his Marines to fight a determined foe and allowed him to position his platoon's heavy machine guns to repel numerous waves of attackers. In the midst of the battle, an amphibious assault vehicle was destroyed, killing or wounding all of its occupants. Gunnery Sergeant LeHew immediately moved to recover the 9 Marines. He again exposed himself to a barrage of fire as he worked for nearly an hour recovering casualties from the wreckage. By his outstanding display of decisive leadership, unlimited courage in the face of enemy fire, and the utmost devotion to duty, Gunnery Sergeant LeHew reflected great credit upon himself and upheld the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Navy service. Now, Justin, I don't read this to embarrass you unduly, but I read it because I think when I read it for the first time, I realized why this mission of History Flight is so important to you. I mean, there you are recovering remains, essentially, in 2003 under fire. That's how important, I guess, this, leave no one behind ethic in the Marine Corps is, how powerful it is. And I don't know if you want to speak to it at all.
The first person, Todd, that when I came over here and joined up with Mark Noah, the first funeral I went to was a man by the name of Tech Sergeant Carlson. Tech Sergeant Carlson was a platoon sergeant in the first wave across Red Beach of the 2nd Assault Amphibian Tractor Battalion, 3rd Platoon specifically, who was killed in action bringing Marines onto the Red Beaches of Tara. Ironically, I was on Task Force Tara in March 23rd of 2003
Right.
in Alpha Company, 3rd Platoon, platoon sergeant, which was the same exact position that Tech Sergeant Carlson was when he assaulted on 20 November 1943 in the same company, same battalion, and same unit. There is a divine power in a hand that kind of guides all this. And that was the first person that was identified and recovered when I came on board here, and I flew out to actually conduct Tech Sergeant Carlson's funeral, who was my predecessor.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that got to escort his remains to the final 6 feet to put him in the ground. You tied it together. Is that whole adage of no one left behind, another human being for the love of their brother or sister that isn't their blood relation family, but who you fight for is people don't care who the president of the United States is. They care for who those are on the left and the right. And it's cross generations. It's Vietnam, it's Korea, the same people that wore that eagle and anchor in the chosen reservoir in Korea, and it came out. The same Eagle Globe and Anchor that defended the Quezon Fire Base in 68, the same Eagle Globe and Anchor, those are my brothers. And to be able to now be in charge and responsible for going throughout the world to be best in position to fulfill that promise, that it's not just this generation, that people don't think that this generation cares as much as the previous generations. I'll be damned. The right people care. And the right people will go and continue to do the work that's needed to do to not let down the American people, because this truly is everything that's still right and good about America today is wrapped up in this mission. It's who we are as Americans. It's the Marine Corps motto is Semper Fidelis, always faithful. It's always faithful in action and words. And to be part of that, it's one of the greatest things I've ever had to do in my life. And I'm very proud of the fact that after I got to hang up uniform after 31 years as a U.S. Marine, that this is the kind of mission that I was called to do following that. And to me, Todd, it just doesn't get any better.
You know, Justin, I'm smiling ear to ear because on my Zoom screen, you are next to Dan Vaughn, a Vietnam Marine whose camera is covered up. It's always covered up. But he has said word for word so many of the things that you just said about, you know, the fighting is about the person on the next to you, the person on the left of you, the person on the right of you, and you know what that commitment to that, what that brotherhood, sisterhood means. Just absolutely wonderful, beautiful. One. Before we go, I know that we've run late here, but this is, boy, was that a quick. I did a double take at the clock. I couldn't believe that we're running so late. We usually end the program at 8. We try to end the program at 8:30. But before we do end, I do want to pass along Rick Arisman, a sailor who's watching on Facebook, asked on Facebook, Justin, what's up with that E5 Navy jumper behind you?
That is, I have an agreement with all of the antique shops from Fredericksburg. I found it very disheartening. If you're an antique shop person, Fredericksburg is a beautiful place. And not only is it one of the most America's historical cities that's out there, there's antique shops from one end to the other, and it's fabulous. But I found it very disheartening, and that when I went in there, a lot of times I would see entire veterans collections that you knew somehow wound up in an estate sale hanging on racks throughout there. And it wasn't the veteran's entire collection. The antique owner was piecing out every little piece of uniform to make as much money as they could that was out of there. So I made an agreement with all of the antique companies here in Fredericksburg that said if they received a complete veteran's estate footlocker or anything else, before they put it out, would they please give me the first right of refusal to buy it? And I don't have connections to him or anything, but that jumper that you see behind you, that is a pharmacist mate second class, the same rank that John Bradley was wearing, and that Red Cross when he helped the Marines raise the flag on Suribachi, another Navy Cross recipient. My wife is a 22 veteran, and she is a combat Navy corpsman after 22 years as well. So we have this blue-green that's here in the family. I got a phone call, and I went down to the basement and found an entire veteran's seat bag from 3rd Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, with his name and everything else, and it had his entire World War II uniform allotment inside of it. And I went around and gathered up every single piece of that uniform, shut it back into that sea bag, to include his blue jumpers, his combat jumpers. He was wounded in action, and I have his address. About a week ago, I took the train to Boston to do some other things. I pulled up his address. I showed up at his house that was on that seat bag that was there, and found a very young couple that now lives, because he had died a few years ago. There was no family living there. And I had explained this entire thing. And I said, you don't know me from anything, but I wanted to come and pay a personal visit after the research that I found of what this man did in World War II. And somewhere in the generation, somebody decided to sell off all of his stuff that is here. And I said, do you have any connection to family who used to live here? And said, ironically, we do. And we bought this house a few years ago from them. And they told me the story of this nice old man that used to live at this house, that helped all the kids on the yard and everything else that was here. And they had no idea what that man did in 1944 when he was wounded at the greatest naval battle in U.S. history at Leyte Gulf, and was there. And this was just an average American veteran stuff that showed up in Fredericksburg, Virginia, that a guy called me and said, Justin, this came in today. And the best thing down here is they normally just say, I know you're not in the resale market, and I know you're in the storytelling market to live these stories. Again, let me have all of it. We brought it right back up here. Then that led me getting on a train to go to Boston to take the photos, meet the family that now lives in his house. And I got to tell that young couple who had a baby in their arms, the guy who used to live here and what his life was like. And they said, can he still stay in contact with you forever? And what I'm actually going to do is make them a little plaque. Oh. And I'm going to send them that plaque. I'm going to tell them, I appreciate if you fix this plaque, if you don't mind, to the front of your house underneath the mailbox. Even if you sell it, it will tell the following generations of the individual and what they gave that originally lived in this house. And it'll be a really cool thing when your own child grows up here to know that this is the house that they grew up in. And that is just, every one of these pieces is the fabric of who we are. It's another stitch in the quilt, Todd, and they're in everywhere you look. This generation that's dying off, they're one relative move from giving away all their entire stuff to someone who don't care. But I'm a firm believer that, like the stories that Geoff tells and everything, I'm a firm believer that a lot of people in those families don't know the same story. And if they heard that story, they would be the person that said, my God, I wish I had my grandfather's stuff that was here. So what I offer them here, Todd, is any family connection that ever comes up and says, that's my grandfather, or that's my great grandfather, I never knew. And what I basically say is, come on down to Fredericksburg or whatever, and you can have your grandfather's stuff back.
Oh, man after my own heart. Oh, boy, your passion for history is as strong as your passion for the Marine Corps, and it's all, the Marine Corps is the history. It's just, that is, what a wonderful commitment that you've made, you know, to that man, and also to just the, the history of our veterans has, and that's what the Veterans Breakfast Club is all about. That's kind of what we're really trying to do here, is to preserve and share and capture these stories. And every veteran has a story is our motto. And thank you, Justin, for being such an eloquent spokesperson for that mission. And thank you, Geoff, for joining us. And thank you, all of us, for joining us tonight. I see that we're coming upon soon 9 o'clock, so I'll end the program, but I do want to let people know we are gathering together again at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Please do join us for our Veterans Breakfast, 9 a.m. Eastern here, same Zoom link. And Sean, we also have a scuttlebutt that was released today, don't we?
Yeah, it's a quick bonus episode. We talk about the recent controversy of a game that's being released called 6 Days in Fallujah, that is based on the Second Battle of Fallujah, and the controversy surrounds it being being marketed as a true story, and that it should our entertainment mirror what happened in real life. We answer that question and ask a few others of our entertainment.
Hey, and I want to let people know too, if you haven't joined if you have never joined us before, if you haven't come to our events before, please do come back. If if you've enjoyed this event, we have all kinds of fascinating guests. We have, Tuskegee Airmen coming on May 25th. We have Tomb Guards of the Unknown Soldier coming with us, coming on our program the following day. It's just, we have a lot of interesting guests. Please do join us. You go to veteransbreakfastclub.org. If you have questions, you could email me, Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.org, and I'll send you our schedule. Thank you so much, Geoff, Raker. Thank you so much, Justin, LeHew. We're honored to have you. What a fascinating night. And thanks to all of you for joining us, and I hope to see you Wednesday morning. All right?